Do I need to change my screen? Am I okay?
No. You just hang out. Let people in, and I think that we're recording. Yeah. Okay. So we're recording, although I can trim off the front.
Oh, that's good.
Hey, everybody. People are starting to roll in here, and it looks like we've got about 4 minutes before we get started. So if anybody needs to get water or do whatever, now's the time. You know, Megan, I may ask you to mute if you don't mind.
Oh, absolutely.
We are going to play your video, and people might have questions for you specifically at the end. So I'm really glad that you're here as a panelist because you'll be able to answer the questions live.
Sure, yeah, no problem.
Okay, cool. Hey, everybody, you're in the right place. Thanks for joining us. We're going to wait till the top of the hour and we'll get started right on time. Respect everybody's time. We've been testing all the systems and we're ready to roll. So we'll be able to start right up at 2 o'clock. All right, everybody. It's 2 o'clock. It's time to start. I want to thank you for being here. My name is Brian Hayden, and this is Forest Burial and What It Means. And we're lucky to have our panelists today from Life Forest. Mel Bennett is going to be doing a lot of the talking, but we also have Megan Sawyer and Teresa Pearson here. And we're going to be here for about an hour. The agenda looks like this. I'm going to just do a little bit of housekeeping. My name is Brian Hayden. I'm with Redesigning the End. I'm helping to host, but I'm not an expert, so you're not going to hear a lot from me. You're going to mostly hear from Mel Bennett with Life Forest. She's going to give us a presentation. And throughout the presentation, what I'd like you to do is, if you have any questions, please put them into the chat or into the Q&A. And I'll be aggregating those questions throughout the presentation. And then at the end, we're going to leave about 20 minutes for Q&A. I'm going to do my best to get everybody's questions answered and just kind of keep them coming as you think about them. So hopefully we'll have a really interactive session. as we get started, I was hoping to find out a little bit about who's here. So I just launched a poll. The question is, what role best describes your connection to the industry? This course was designed with funeral directors in mind, but my sense is that maybe we have some other types of folks here. So go ahead and fill that out if you can. And in the meantime, I'll tell you what you're gonna learn over the next hour. The big thing is lessons learned from this Life Forest team. You know, they've done a lot of really incredible things. They've done a lot of things that are new, and they've kind of drawn on a lot of different traditions. And so they're going to share their lessons learned. I think that's the main reason to be here. That's going to include the basics of forest burial, some key terms, the need that this type of community serves, and the importance of mission and having a mission. And then, you know, where to find more information if you so desire it. So let's take a look at this poll. We have a little more than half of you are funeral directors. We have a whole bunch of others, and then somebody here who's just here for you know, personal reasons, and that's great. So welcome everybody. Everybody's welcome, but as expected, the bulk of you are funeral directors. So glad to have you. As such, we do have continuing education credits available. This was pre-approved for 2 CEUs. The requirement that we have for you to get those CEUs is we have to do like a learning check, and you have to actually take all the hours. So Zoom doesn't do that. And so in order to get your certificate of completion, we do have it available here, which many of you are already kind of like logged into that, but that is where you go to get your certificate of completion. And that's just because Zoom didn't do it all. So I'll make sure that everybody has a, I'll make sure everybody has access to that. I'll send an email tonight probably when we get this recorded and edited and up, so you'll have a chance to watch it there as well. So look for that email when we're done. Redesigning the End is a professional education platform. We do have other sessions, including how to host a virtual funeral, opportunities in green burial, and then we're doing a Medicare session coming up on March 24th. Just want to invite you, all these events are free. Just want to invite you to participate in anything that looks good. And before I hand it over to Mel, I just want to say, you know, on behalf of everyone here today, thank you to everyone at Life Forest for generously sharing all these like really hard lessons that you've learned over the last couple of years. It's really cool that you're taking the time to share this information with us. I appreciate it. We all appreciate it. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to you, Mel. Mel, you're still muted.
All right, thank you, Brian. I am going to share my screen now. Please let me know if I have done so correctly.
Looks great.
Well, thank you, Brian. And thank you for such a beautiful introduction. Your services are so appreciated, and they help us to present our information in a clear, concise, and way that is best viewed by everybody. So thank you for that. So we're going to talk today about Life Forest, and the thing I want to share with you is that the information provided is specific to Life Forest and things that we have learned as we've created this cemetery space. Also be aware that all burial grounds, cemeteries, scattering forests or gardens, conservation cemeteries, natural, they all contain their own practices and procedures. So just speak with them and ask them any questions that you have that are relative to their specific environment. So as a cemetery, I think we need to ask ourselves what's the importance of burial. And what we have found is that the importance of burial is preserving ancestry. Now, a personal story that is regards to that, when I was 27 years old, I traveled all the way to Sweden in order to find the burial spot of my great grandfather. And while that was an amazing journey, and I learned a lot about my family and my family's history, a giant part of that is that I learned about myself. And I learned about aspects of myself through the eyes of my ancestors. A lot of questions about, I wonder why I feel this way or I react that way came to light in that journey. And, as we talk about the fact that cremation rates have risen in such a way, we need to think as we're scattering, are we still protecting ancestry? And that is the mission of burial. So what do conservation cemeteries protect? As we just spoke of, they protect legacy, the richness of an individual's life, ancestry, a trail of where your family started and the descendants that followed. There's also, of course, environmental advocacy, and we work to protect natural environment from destruction or pollution. Community interest, and that brings together people who share the same interest or passion, and that brings action. And then, most importantly, a cemetery keeper's job is compassion, recognizing the suffering of others and taking action to help. So the pictures you see here are my resume for the job that I have as a cemetery keeper of Life Forest. In the upper left-hand corner, there's a picture of myself and my mom. The picture to the right is taken exactly 10 years later. My mom suffered from Alzheimer's, and it was a terrible, terrible decline that she had. Next to her in her wheelchair is my daughter, Natalie. So I became part of that sandwich generation that many of you funeral directors work with every day. People who are taking care of their ill parents while simultaneously raising young children. I suffered pretty terribly in that 10-year span of time, and I experienced a lot of loss, which gives me the empathy in order to understand what these people are suffering with. And I wanted something that I saw online with the tree burial. But when I looked for cemeteries that actually existed to plant these trees, there weren't any. And I really, truly wanted ancestral burial and recording. So you can see my mom here. This is her burial at Life Forest. She was the first burial at Life Forest. And behind the urn, you can see her tree. Doesn't look like much, right? Sticks. It was early in the season. But we buried her, and this photo was taken with my daughter Natalie by her tree. And that growth of those leaves, it heals. I know it may seem a little bit different, but feeling this new life created from something that you've lost has a healing factor, as does nature. Seeing those petals on those flowers almost felt like seeing her smile again. So how do we do this? We worked very hard at Life Forest to combine technology with nature. Now, usually those two words are not in the same sentence, but we did so because we felt that cemeteries are important, but they're slightly antiquated. And in order to bring them to today, there's so many tools that we can use that aren't necessarily actively being engaged with cemeteries. Some of those are using specific coordinates, which burial grounds are often doing. And we record those as the actual burial location. We also provide QR code links. And what that is that little 2-inch square that you see. Those are at the base of people's trees. People can scan those with their cell phone, and they're brought up to a free remembrance page. Family can upload pictures, videos. This helps to bring a person's legacy alive. And when we think about how that in fact affects the environment, it's twofold. One is that A 2-inch square takes up much less space than a giant concrete monument. But also you're sharing very personal information, so it makes it a more intimate experience. The other thing that we feel is important at Life Forest is the idea of equity. And the beauty of these little codes is that they're very inexpensive for a grieving family. And everybody has the opportunity to share the same amount of information. So as you visit the cemetery, there aren't these giant monuments mixed with not so giant monuments. So in that vein, we use mapping technology for cemetery planning and the storage of the storing of burial data. So what this has allowed us to do, thanks to Dr. Megan Sawyer, who you will hear from next, is that we can store a person's legacy information in correlation with the map of the cemetery. And what that allows for is that in the future, we can work with and share this information with public map offerings such as the USGS mapping system. You can see here how we can tie in the deceased's name, birth and death dates, links to the obituary information, which we discussed in the last slide, and also things specific to a forest cemetery, like when was the tree planted and what type of tree was it? About what is the lifespan of that tree and at what year should you be thinking about checking on it? And then, expectancy of when your tree would be replanted. So next we hear from Megan. Megan has been instrumental for us, and I'm going to share my screen back to Brian in order to play Megan's video.
Hello, my name is Megan Sawyer, and I will be speaking today about the use of technology in planning and sustaining cemetery forests for future generations. Life Forest believes that as steward of Conservation Cemetery, it is important to use technology to protect the legacy of our loved ones and the environment. This presentation will briefly introduce the concept of GIS mapping and will present a case study of a hypothetical property in Henniker, New Hampshire, on how GIS mapping can help a conservation plan for its future. Preserving the legacy of the land is important when considering the future of a conservation cemetery. The mission of the Conservation Cemetery is to preserve the surrounding land while providing a place for future generations to visit their loved ones. This next series of slides will provide a brief overview of Geographic Information Systems, or GIS mapping. Geographical Information System mapping is based on the science of geography and integrates many types of data in the formulation of a cohesive visual aid for understanding a problem or a question. Depending on the depth or direction of the analysis, GIS mapping can help researchers identify trends and interpret causal relationships. Researchers can also use GIS mapping techniques to present a visual to audiences who may not be familiar with the nitty-gritty data to help them understand the results of the analysis. As a conservation cemetery, Life Forest used GIS mapping to aid in the planning of memorial trees and groves by analyzing, in conjunction with local arborists, the best trees for the soil and land type. As GIS mapping incorporates spatial coordinate information, or more broadly speaking, GPS coordinates and data at those coordinates, a conservation cemetery can use this technique to walk their land and plan future directions of the cemetery, including walking paths, memorial gardens where burials are not viable, and places for reflection. These can tie into local and regional databases of trails and paths if the cemetery so desires. When a conservation cemetery is planning for an expansion on a current property or is looking at a new parcel of land entirely, it can be helpful to get a lay of the land, so to speak. Data that can be helpful in this process includes political boundaries such as townships, which can demonstrate if the land in question straddles more than one township or county, and road type, including the class of road. This latter point, especially in New England mud season, can determine if the road is maintained by the town or the state and may give an idea of access in various seasons. Other information that may be helpful in this preliminary period, even after the parcel is obtained, is watershed and wetlands information, soil information including soil type, farmland type, which gives an idea of the health of the soil, and topographical information, including slope and major elevation changes. Many states have repositories for the previous mentioned data. For example, New Hampshire houses a wide variety of data at granite.unh.edu. The data at this site spans information from fire stations and well sites to digital satellite images of the states. In addition, municipalities often provide some data for free as a downloadable file or through a GIS online viewer. For initial planning purposes, the online viewer is often sufficient to generate an idea of what the basic region looks like. For a more in-depth analysis, more digging is necessary, and often the town hall is the first place to start to determine if GIS files are available for free or purchased for private use. Once you have a GIS file, of which there are several types that are beyond the extent of this brief introduction, it is essential to have a viewer to open these files. Two such viewers are ArcGIS and QGIS. ArcGIS is probably more well-known than QGIS, and the online version allows you to view your GPS files. In fact, many municipalities use an ArcGIS viewer or a subsidiary of ArcGIS to demonstrate their GIS information online. QGIS, which is the program that will be demonstrated in this example in the next several slides, is an open source program parallel to ArcGIS that has additional features continually being added by the user community at large. The next series of slides will demonstrate the capabilities of the QGIS program to label soil type, slope, and wetland prevalence in an arbitrarily defined region in Henniker, New Hampshire. On this slide, we see the mapping program QGIS, which uses GIS data and geospatial data to create maps. Here we see a map of all the townships of New Hampshire. This is a starting point that most state data often has, either the entire state or region, with information about the town or different mappings. We see that we can add information about the roads, here indicated in red, or we can add information about the wetlands area, here indicated in pink. Notice that not all townships have been mapped with the National Wetlands Inventory Plus areas. We see up here, especially in the northern part of the state, that the NWI Plus dataset has not reached this northern edge of the state. That does not mean there are no wetlands in this northern edge of the state. It just means that for this particular dataset, the NWI Plus, this map has not been completed. So for the purposes of this example, we're looking at the town of Henniker, here indicated in red. And so if we zoom into this town, what we can do is we can look and say, well, if we're considering just the soil data, let's look at just soil data. We see that the town of Henniker has a lot of soil data here. The soil data is indicated with, let me turn on. Here the soil data is indicated by gradients here, where each little polygon indicates a different type of soil. So in the town of Henniker, here indicated in brown with soil data, I've turned on the labels for the slopes. But it's hard to tell what exactly is the soil data that we need when we're looking at this. We first need to define ourselves a region. We can also look at the wetlands data with Henniker, and so we can see how the wetlands inventory flows through the soil data, as well as the road mapping of Henniker as well. So we can see Henniker has some properties where we have soil data, wetlands, and road data. So taking out the soil data makes this more clear with just the wetlands and the road. Now, if we look at a potential portion of land here indicated in this green portion, so if this is Henniker at large, the small green polygon is an arbitrary parcel of land. And if we're interested in looking to see what is happening with this arbitrary parcel of land in terms of wetlands data and soil data, if we were a conservation cemetery, we can look into this land to see what's happening. So let's zoom to that layer, and we'll turn on our soil data. So let me turn off some of the Henniker soil data. So Henniker soil data, if we were to zoom out slightly, we see that we have these different areas of soil with different types, from Pillsbury fine sandy loam with 0 to 8% slopes with very stony, to scary fine sandy loam, Peru fine sandy loam, meadows edge peat, And then we have our region. And the data that we are truly interested in is just the data contained within the region of this polygon. So we'd like to clip our data to this polygon. And we can do so by just looking at these pieces here. So if we look at the soil here, we see that we can color the soil, these different regions, going back to the Henniker. We're clipping out regions of our soil. We can color the areas of these smaller regions according to their slope. Here, this orange strip is sloped less than 1%, the green strip is slopes between 2 and 4%, and the red is slopes greater than 4%. We can also apply a label to these data where we can add the soil type as a label, and we see that the soil type here is now given as Pillsbury sandy loam for this little section, Peru fine sandy loam, Meadows Edge peat, and more Peru fine sandy loam on the edge. This gives an idea, if you're a conservation cemetery, on how your land might look in order for planning purposes. You can also add in wetlands data. So we see the Meadows Edge peat falls in a national wetlands inventory area. So we see that there are several spots that would make inappropriate burial locations. GIS mapping and technology are helpful not only in determining if a parcel of land is appropriate for a conservation cemetery, but can also be used for incorporating information about in-use conservation cemeteries. This final section will discuss how Life Forest uses GIS mapping and GPS technology to connect the legacy of the land with the legacy of our loved ones. GIS mapping allows for the incorporation of spatial data into maps, which can richly enhance the user experience. By adding details to shapefiles that build a GIS map, these shapefiles can hold a wealth of information conservation cemeteries can use for planning purposes, as well as documenting burials. At Life Forest, we use GPS devices to determine the GPS coordinates for each memorial tree and record information such as the date of birth, death, and cremation number to the tree's location in the shapefile we use in our GPS map. Other pieces of information that we can record are the type, date of planting, and expected lifespan of the tree to better help our arborists plan for the future health of the conservation forest. Conservation cemeteries, after determining what appropriate parcels of lands may work for their cemetery, need to use technology in order to preserve the legacy of those buried amongst their groves. For this example, we have our arbitrary plot of land in Henniker, New Hampshire. We have 3 individuals, Robert Smith, Jane Doe, and Sandra Wood, here indicated. If I were to click on the point for Robert Smith, the GPS coordinate for point for Robert Smith is given XY coordinates. Robert Smith has a variety of information associated with that point. The name, the beneficiary, the obituary to link, date of birth and death, tree type, if it's a pre-need plot. If I were to click on Sandra Wood, we can see that Sandra Wood is a pre-need plot and thus doesn't have a date of death at this point. But you can still link like a beneficiary and other coordinates. For Jane Doe, you can see that there are a similar sort of, you don't have to fill in, there's no obituary link, but all this information is referenced in the system. And this allows you to do things such as, if you were to have a Children's Memorial Day, you could search for all plots where the age of the person who has died is above or below a certain age. Or if you were to have a Remembrance Day for somebody, you could go and help use their obituary, update their obituary as things or those beneficiaries changed. Life Forest believes that through appropriate stewardship of our forests and conservation land today, our memorial trees and groves will be around for generations to come. Thank you for your attention, and for any questions, please visit thelifeforest.com.
Back to you, Megan.
All right. Can you hear me okay, Brian?
Yep.
Okay. So following that, I hope you all ingested all of that information. It's a lot, but it's wonderful. So going back to forest cemeteries and the importance of perpetual care. What does that mean in a forest cemetery, and how is it achieved? So including is information about protective covenants, burial contracts, right-of-ways, conservation easements, and cemetery law. How does that apply to a forest cemetery? So one of the things that we came across at Life Forest is that a lot of legal information for cremation, which is now 80% here in New Hampshire of the population, ends at the crematorium. And if we're really truly trying to protect legacy, there's a small issue with that. So we worked with the Hillsborough County of Deeds and some legal assistance in order to figure out a better layer of protection. And we did that by recording actual coordinates of the burials and tying it to the Life Forest land deed. What that does is it allows for a person, anybody within the general public, can type in any name here. You see here Michael Joseph Panisi. They can go to the AVA search engine through the Hillsborough County of Deeds, type in Michael Joseph Panisi and pull up this affidavit. And they can know that, okay, Michael is in fact the named beneficiary of this plot. That is a way that we can bring technology in and kind of do away with a lot of the cemetery paper records, which can be difficult to maneuver. What are protective covenants? So a covenant is a written promise between two or more parties when a party pledges to do something or refrain from doing something. For example, a forest cemetery may offer an affirmative covenant saying, "We will bury your loved one with the least environmental impact as possible," as well as a negative covenant. "We promise not to sell this forest and build a high-rise." Pretty important. So what are burial contracts? Oftentimes the covenants are contained in the umbrella of the contract, and burial contracts are binding agreements and take the form of a purchase agreement. And they're binding on both parties, the party that purchases the plot as well as the burial ground. These contracts include information about who's purchasing the plot, the location of the plot, rules and regulations of the cemetery, and how to transfer ownership if need be. What are right-of-ways? So a right-of-way in a deed of a property allows another individual to travel through the property. So why would this be important in a forest cemetery? Well, obviously trails. And many forest cemeteries are surrounded by conservation land. That land is not owned by the forest cemetery. It's usually owned by conservation commissions. In our instance, it's the local Hillsborough Conservation Commission. So the parcel of land that Life Forest owns currently has over 60 acres surrounding it of conservation land. And to support those efforts of the neighboring conservation lands, it's important to have a right of way so that people can enjoy the land that it's surrounding, and it acts as a nice buffer. The other important aspect of this is that it gives the Conservation Commission the ability to monitor appropriate stewardship of the burial forest. I'm going to say that 100 times after this now. What are conservation easements? Similar to a conservation easement, but not quite the same, is use and monitoring of the property, but the ownership of the property remains to the forest cemetery. Conservation easements are comprised of many elements, and it's important to note that all conservation easements are different. They are private agreements made between the landowner and the conservation organization. Some elements of an agreement could include the purpose, definition of the easement areas on the land, use limitation, reserved rights, and requirement for notifications of land transfer, taxes, and maintenance. Next, what is cemetery law? Why is it important? So cemetery law differs from state to state. but almost all cemetery law protects the buried. And most of those have rights to have legal action against defamation of cemetery monuments. They require documentation of burials. Some states require a certain amount of funds for perpetual care accounts. And there's also very strict guidelines around disinterment of burials and building code guidelines protecting those burial plots. So what we did is we ensured that the life forest burial trees are documented and recorded as that person's burial monument, hence protecting the burial trees from ever being cut down. So, can a green burial or conservation cemetery still operate as a state recognized legal cemetery? So we're going to reference an article that is by Alex Brown. And what he states in that article is that no state laws explicitly prevent green burial. But what we found at Life Forest is that we did receive some misinformation when asking permissions. So our recommendation would be in our learning process that if you're looking to start a green burial cemetery, just start out by looking at the resources offered by the Green Burial Council. And what is the cemetery law and why is it helpful for cemeteries? It can act as a protection for the naturally interred, while conservation easement and right-of-ways protect the land and the environment. If you're a funeral director, you can verify whether a burial ground is recognized and protected by cemetery law by verifying that is listed with the Department of Vital Records State Cemetery List. So next we're going to hear from Teresa Pearson. She is our tree doctor. After we plant a memorial tree, Teresa visits several times for that first few weeks and ensures that that tree does not experience any transfer shock. So Brian, back to you.
I'm a landscape designer and I have my own business doing landscape design and installs in New Hampshire. For the most part, the soil in New Hampshire is very healthy. It tends to be on the acidic side, pH, meaning it's closer to 7, 8, or 9, rather than more neutral, where you have the lime content. And you also have what is called a lot of sandy loam in our area. So if you look around the state of New Hampshire as you're driving wherever, you're going to see what plant varieties are happy in New Hampshire. And that's going to tell you what you want to put onto your property, because happy plants are going to thrive and bring you happiness for years and years, probably decades. Some of the plants in New Hampshire that we currently use are considered a New Hampshire native, which means that they're very adaptable to the space. They require less maintenance, they require less fertilization, they require less watering. Some are hybrids. Speaking of fruit trees, one of the easiest plants to grow, and probably most enjoyable, is an apple tree. Apple trees are very happy growing in a variety of soil. They're easy keepers. Depending what variety you choose, you can wind up with any degree of fruit that's going to be different sizes, different colors. It's going to store well or maybe not store so well. And if you have crab apples on your property, your crab apple can act as a pollinator. One of the things that we do see a lot of in New Hampshire is the white birch tree. The white birch trees are quite prolific in New Hampshire and all of New England. But we started importing birch trees from China probably about 20 years ago. And we did that because there are regions of China that have similar zones to us. And turns out that the birch trees coming from China grew well and were more disease resistant than what we had been using here in the US. So when you're driving up 93, say, and you're heading up north, all you have to do is look along the side of the road, and you're going to see all of the birch trees there. And Mother Nature has chosen to team them up with white pines and other conifers um, because they work well together. They're good team players. The roots of each plant support the other plant. The conifers, not losing their needles in the wintertime, can offer protection to the birch tree bark in the cold, icy, nor'easter type winters that we get here. And whenever I plant, whenever I design, I always think about the entire environment. So when you're putting a birch tree on your property, when you're putting the conifers on your property, when you're putting a fruit-bearing winterberry on your property, you're not just bringing year-round beauty to your property and adding value to your property, you're also feeding the birds and offering cover for various critters. And there's nothing better for the entire ecosystem. There are many varieties of what we call ornamental trees. Typically, an ornamental is a flowering plant that produces fruit. And it may not turn out to be fruit that necessarily we're going to wind up harvesting or eating. It may be that that fruit is there for the birds or the squirrels or the chipmunks or whomever, deer. But the ornamentals, we put them on our property mainly for their aesthetic value. Most of them are spring bloomers, and after winter in New Hampshire, you're always ready for some color in the spring. And there's so many choices to choose from. You could put dogwoods on your property, magnolias, amelanche, which is commonly known as serviceberry, chionanthus, which is commonly known as a fringe tree, a Chinese fringe tree, caragana, which gets a little yellow flower in the spring and is just a beautiful plant. And then, of course, there's the standard flowering crabapple tree, which is just beautiful and an abundant plant. And even the form of the, so to speak, naked crabapple in the winter is a really beautiful thing for any landscape. The other thing that you want to blend with your ornamentals are evergreens. And the benefit of the evergreen is that it adds year-round artistry to the space. It provides cover for animals. They are acid lovers, which means that, again, they like the higher pH in their soil, which means that they're very happy in New Hampshire. Even though they're called an evergreen, they do shed their needles at certain times throughout the year. They don't lose all of their needles, they just go through a shedding process. And as they shed those needles, they are basically reinvigorating the soil for themselves, because those needles are going to be adding more acid to the soil, which they love. And this is true pretty much of most of the trees and plant life that you find in New Hampshire. It sort of creates and provides its own compost bin around itself, which continues to feed itself in a very natural, slow-released fashion. The beauty of the evergreens is that there's so many to choose from. You could choose balsams, Fraser firs, cypress, juniper, spruce. And within all of those varieties that I just named, there's subsets of small ones, larger ones. And what all these evergreens provide is year-round color, but you can also get different shapes, sizes, anything that you need to add to perhaps your existing landscape, or if you just want to create a feature with just evergreens to attract the birds. You can't go wrong with any one of these, any one of these evergreens. I do think that every property should contain some evergreen. As we walk onto the Life Forest property, you look around and you see what nature wants to be there. And so if you're choosing a tree for a loved one, follow the guidelines of what they're offering you or suggesting, because that's what's going to not only add to the aesthetics of that space, but the tree is going to be happy and healthy for decades. And as we walk around the property, We look at the many gifts that nature has given to us, and when we decide to put a plant there, or if we decide to put a plant or a tree on our property, or wherever, we're giving back to nature and thanking her for the gift that she has given to us. And that's the beauty of this site, is that it's a perfect balance of us uh, taking some gifts from nature, but also giving back to nature. And it brings us a great peace of mind in the process.
Mel, back over to you. We got about 19 minutes left and 4 or 5 questions we want to get to. So just keep that in mind. You are muted right now, Mel.
Am I back?
You're back.
All right, thanks so much. Okay, so to honor our time here, we have supplied to you a document about urban nature experiences. You can read that on your own time if it interests you. The statistics noted in this article validate why forest cemeteries start a person's healing process after the loss of a loved one. So in the past, we would see churches with graveyards, and what is their purpose? So what do you think when you see a historic church with a graveyard, AKA graves in the yard? My studies in sociology and anthropology point me to something very, very simple. The church equals a healing community. The graveyard, a protected final resting place. So as municipal and private cemeteries replaced graveyards, we need to ask ourselves, what have we lost with the lack of the healing community that the church offered? And how can we reinstate this important factor of healing? So in order to do that at Life Forest, we look at something called the gift economy. And there was an article that was supplied that you could read. I'm going to just do a quick excerpt from that. The service berries feel like a pure gift from the land. In the presence of such gifts, gratitude is the intuitive first response. If our first response is gratitude, then our second is reciprocity, to give a gift in return. Gratitude and reciprocity are the currency of a gift economy, and they have a remarkable property of multiplying with every exchange. Their energy concentrating as they pass from hand to hand, which creates a truly renewable resource. I accept the gift from the serviceberry bush and then spread that gift with a dish of berries to my neighbor, who makes a pie to share with his friend, who feels so wealthy in food and friendship that he volunteers at the food pantry. This is how it goes. So we offer voluntary monthly meetings, and we all share resources for self-care and healing after that loss. We strive to create a place and a group of people who can reach out to one another for support and mutual understanding. We have at Mother's Day, moms who've lost children or children who've lost moms reach out and say, "How are you?" So we do this through creating community events, always no charge, of course, and in simple compassion. The young man here in his graduation robe is standing next to his sister's burial tree. His sister was tragically struck by a vehicle and instantly killed, and she was a child. Our charitable mission is to never charge to bury a child. This young man reached out to Life Force not knowing that, and he asked, "What is the cheapest tree?" Well, we worked with this young man in order to ensure that his sister was buried. And every week, this young man showed up on his bicycle and he mowed the lawn for us. And I'd always offer him a little bit of money, whatever I had in my wallet. And he always said, no, no, thank you. I just want to be here with my sister. And this is the heart of a gift economy. So, as you work with different burial grounds and cemeteries, most have a charitable mission that they hold dear. Um, our charitable mission relates back to my mom. That's her in the picture. There's not really much of a resemblance, I know, but um, she lost my little brother as a baby. She never recovered. It was something she wore and carried her whole life. And I know that this would be an important mission. So Life Forest never charges to bury a child. It's not income dependent. It's just the moral thing to do. We do that by going hand in hand with Children's Burial Assistance, who's a nonprofit, and we give them a respectful deed recorded burial within our cemetery. And that's all. Thank you. And I'm open to some questions, and as is our other panelists.
All right. We've got them too.
All right.
I'm going to fire away at you. We got 13 minutes. I think we're going to be just fine. So
Okay.
Alan's asking, how do you keep the QR code piece from decay?
Well, they're on aluminum. So they're a small 2-inch aluminum square, and that protects it from obvious weather factors, rain, cold, ice. And so they're directly printed on that aluminum, and people can scan those. Yeah.
Okay. Curious about demand for this type of burial. Do we feel like the market is already here, or is it coming?
I think that's a really good question. In our experiences, there is demand for this. However, people don't know that it exists. I think they're starting to hear of these burial pods, and we hear a lot of people, I want to be a tree. But I think that in those statements, there is the lack of knowledge that something like this exists, because up until now, there have been some, like Herland Forest, for example. They plant a tree. They do a beautiful job. They're a legal cemetery, and so people may have heard of them. But as somebody who has just recently come on and offered this to the general public as their kind of point growing a forest, it's just a little new. So I think it deems waiting to see, but we hope so.
So Sue's asking, I've attended several provider meetings and webinars in which they're somewhat cynical about GIS. Megan, maybe this comes your way, saying how unreliable it is compared to the old-fashioned ways of discrete metal pegs. What do you think about that?
Yeah, so one thing that we do is we take several GPS coordinates. So our GPS device is accurate to plus or minus 16 feet. And so what you can do is you can take several coordinates to triangulate the satellite devices. So basically what happens is, as the satellite moves, if you take your GPS measurements at several different points in time, you're getting different kind of triangulated points. And so you can average those points in the GIS system to get a coordinate, go back and check that coordinate against what the tree is at a different point in time. And so then you can verify that point before it's recorded in the deed. And so that's kind of a way that we have that. And then also the QR code is in a stake next to the tree. And so that is kind of the metal stake, kind of that discrete point that you're talking about. But we also want to have that longevity of the GPS coordinates for people who don't want to go out with a metal detector to go check every tree for that plant, for that little metal stake.
So both.
Essentially is what, with the QR code and then the GPS for the deed recording. It also allows us more freedom to not have a grid plot line for where trees can be planted. We can follow what nature has with the design of the forest. We can let nature dictate where the path it should be based on the landscape, versus saying a tree must be planted here because that's where the grid says it has to be planted, as would be in a more traditional cemetery, perhaps.
Great. Curious to know, why don't you do full body burials?
So we are freshly off the gate, and currently our approval as far as planning commission and everything that is presented is for cremation. That is not saying that we're not working towards full body burial, and we are excited about that and open to it and working towards that. We have what I believe to be very much so legal rights, but there are some check boxes and I's and T's to cross. So as we look at demand for that, then we have all of our knowledge in place in order to enact being and doing full body burial. So keep with us, keep asking. It's not a no, it's a hopefully a soon, and that's it for now.
Is the Conservation Authority compensated by Life Forest for the easement? For instance, a percentage of plot sales?
No. So the easement of Life Forest and the right of way to the land. So as we worked with Megan and other mapping, and we truly looked for a plot of land that had conservation already in place around it. It was the town of Hillsborough has over 6,000 acres of conservation land. Their conservation commission is robust. It's a beautiful central spot of the state. And so as we focused our search for appropriate land, we looked for empty lots of land that had existing conservation as well as right-of-ways. And so the Life Forest lot of land, those things existed, and then we worked together with the conservation commission in order to make sure that we had respected what they would like, worked towards the right of way, making sure we keep it cut appropriately in the grass, maintain, so ticks, things like that don't come about. And also we provided parking and signage at their request, and it's important. So people who want to join and enjoy the conservation land that's attached through the conservation cemetery can do so very easily. So there is no financial back and forth, but we certainly are working with them in order to see if we can set up, QR donation code links, help them by getting some signage and properly document the trails that are connected and things of that nature. So we want to have a mutually beneficial relationship because our mission is the same, conservation. And I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, and she followed up, says Life Forest owns the land and therefore the Conservation Authority in essence gave it to you, no payment. And she says, that sounds like a lovely arrangement.
Thank you. Is there any other?
No, I mean, if, funeral directors are interested in, I guess, learning more, or what sort of a pathway is there to sort of staying in touch?
Oh, well, we hope we make that as easy as possible by just go to our website, thelifeforest.com. You can see, I don't know if my screen is shared or not anymore at this point. Call us, send us an email, and we'll help you, and we'll help any of the families that you send to us in order to give them an ease of process. And any questions you have, just reach out. We're happy to answer them.
Well, on behalf of everybody here, Mel and Megan, I want to say thank you very much for sharing what you've learned. And as I said at the beginning, if you are interested in the continuing education credits, will be a link and you can go in and print off your certificate once you do the learning check. That's available now, but I'll send you an email later tonight with the recording and everything too. And assuming there are no more questions, thanks again, you guys.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Megan.
Thank you.
All right. Have a good day, everybody out there.
All right, go
All right.
get them. Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.